Western North America 154 million years ago, a time known as the Jurassic Period, a warm and lush era filled with some of the most spectacular animals to have ever lived on our planet, animals that we know today as dinosaurs. In what is now known as Wyoming, giant dinosaurs dominate the landscape like the gigantic sauropods and the spiked stegosaurs, while large carnivorous dinosaurs like the allosaurs reign supreme. But under the shadows of these incredible giants, there were smaller dinosaurs that live in secrecy as they try to survive in an environment prone to severe weather changes and fierce competition. One of these secretive dinosaurs was a fast and agile predator that managed to survive in this world full of giants. Discovered nearly 60 years before the start of the Dinosaur Renaissance, this dinosaur would provide important insights into the evolution between dinosaurs and birds during the early days of dinosaur paleontology. On this episode of Epoch Now, we invite you to join us on an incredible journey to uncover the story of one of the earliest bird-like dinosaurs to ever be discovered. Welcome to Ornitholestes, Osborn's robber bird. The story of Ornitholestes begins all the way back in July of 1900, where a partial skeleton with a badly crushed skull was found in the Bone Cabin Quarry near the town of Medicine Bow, Wyoming. The quarry is located within the Morrison Formation, which stretches throughout 13 different states in the continental United States, with the formation itself being dated back to the Cambrian stage to the Devonian stage of the late Jurassic. The holotype AMNH619 was discovered by paleontologists Peter C. Kaizen, Paul Miller, and Frederick Brewster Loomis during the expedition for the American Museum of Natural History. The specimen wouldn't be described until 3 years later, when American geologist and paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn, the same man who would later go on to describe Tyrannosaurus rex, recognized it as a brand new genus of theropod dinosaur. Osborn named the dinosaur Ornitholestes hermanni. The name Ornitholestes means bird robber, with ornithos being derived from the Greek word for bird and lestes for the word robber. The species name hermanni honors Adam Herman, who was the head director of the museum. Adam would go on to direct the restoration and mounting of the skeleton as well. After its initial description, new material for the genus has unfortunately been scarce and problematic. An incomplete hand named AMNH587 was also found in the same quarry and was assigned to Ornitholestes in Osborn's 1903 description. However, over a century later in 2005, paleontologist Kenneth Carpenter would discover a new genus of theropod in the Bone Cabin Quarry just a few hundred yards from where the holotype of Ornitholestes was found. Kenneth would name the new dinosaur Tanicolagrius topwilsonii. Shortly afterwards, comparisons were made between Tanicolagrius and AMNH587, and paleontologists concluded that the specimen was virtually identical. Tanicolagrius therefore would be reclassified as the first ever discovered remains of Tanicolagrius instead of Ornitholestes. 2 years after AMNH587's reclassification, paleontologist John Foster reported that he had found fossils that belonged to Ornitholestes in the Dry Mesa Quarry in southwestern Colorado. However, these remains have yet to be described, and whether it belongs to Ornitholestes or a completely different theropod is yet to be determined. The validity of the genus has also been called into question, with paleontologist Charles Whitney Gilmore in 1920 concluding that Ornitholestes is identical to another dinosaur called Saurus. But almost 80 years after Osborn's original description, paleontologist John Ostrom would revive the genus. Additionally, new material has been found of Ornitholestes from an undisclosed part of Wyoming. However, information on the new specimen is very limited and unclear at this time. As of 2025, the holotype specimen of Ornitholestes are the only remains that we currently know of that belong to the genus, and hopefully more fossils will be discovered soon that will help paleontologists understand this creature even more. Outside of the already little fossil material we have of Ornitholestes, not much is known about its full appearance. However, scientists have hypothesized over the years as to what this tiny predator would have looked like. A little over a decade after the discovery of the small feathered dinosaur Sinosauropteryx in 1996. In 2007, paleontologist John Foster proposed a theory that many smaller Saurosaurs would have similarly possessed feathers and that the same could apply for Ornitholestes. But since it was a relatively older member of the clade during its time, its feathers have been speculated to have been highly primitive. Foster hypothesized that Ornitholestes would have had shorter feathers that covered a majority of its body, with the exception of its legs, along with longer ones being found on the top of its head and neck and wings on its forearms. Before then, Gregory S. Paul had speculated that Ornitholestes had a small nasal horn at the tip of its snout in 1988, but this has since been proven false since the holotype material found for it was in poor condition and badly damaged during fossilization. When looking at its size, Ornitholestes is a relatively small dinosaur compared to the other dinosaurs in its environment. In its original 1903 description, Osborn postulated it to have a length of 2.22 meters or 7.28 feet, while in 1988, Gregory S. Paul would estimate it to be 2.08 meters or 6.28 feet long and weigh in at 12.6 kilograms or 27.8 pounds. Alongside the previously mentioned hypothesis John Foster made about it having feathers, in the same year he proposed that Ornitholestes had a length of 2 meters or 6.6 feet and had to have the same weight as Gregory S. Paul's 1988 estimates. Its latest size estimate would take place 1 year after, when paleontologists John A. Long and Peter Schouten hypothesized it to have a weight of 15 kilograms or 33 pounds, a comparable size to modern-day foxes. Due to this, it is suggested that Ornitholestes would have served its niche as one of the smaller predators in its ancient ecosystem, scurrying under the shadows of the much larger dinosaurs during the time of the Titans. Ornitholestes is a basalmost member of the very large clade of dinosaurs referred to as Saurosaurs. This robust group of animals has survived for an incredibly long time, ranging from the Middle Jurassic to even lasting as long as up to the modern day, with the vast array of bird species living alongside us. During their humble beginnings, a vast majority of early Saurosaurs were generally small theropods such as Alvarezsasaurs and Proceratosaurids that lived under the footsteps of the far larger Ceratosaurids and Carnosaurs. As the Jurassic reached its end and the Cretaceous continued on, this clade began to diversify, not just in species but also in their body plans, ranging from massive theropods such as Tyrannosaurus rex and Maipe macrophorax to smaller predators such as dromaeosaurids, the ostrich-like ornithomimids, and even some morphological oddities including Verizinosaurus and Dinochirus. Perhaps rather ironically, Gregory S. Paul once argued for Ornitholestes and Proceratosaurus to be placed within Allosauridae under the subfamily Ornitholestine. Eventually, Paul would later abandon this hypothesis due to being difficult to work with. Proceratosaurus ended up being assigned as a tyrannosauroid, while Ornitholestes is generally considered to be closer to Maniraptorans, the group which modern-day birds and other small to medium feathered dinosaurs belong to. In fact, as of now, there's an upcoming publication that was revealed during the 81st annual meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, which finds what paleontologist Kimberly Chappell and colleagues consider as robust evidence that Ornitholestes might be one of the earliest branching members within Oviraptorosauria, based on CT scans of the animal's skull. If this study becomes heavily supported, Ornitholestes alongside the leathery-winged Scanscorioopterids found in China could potentially extend the geographic time range of Oviraptorosaurs as far back as the late Jurassic, showing that Oviraptorosaurs diversified early on in their evolutionary lineage enough to where some groups experimented with flight. Overall, as of 2025, with the upcoming paper still not published yet, the phylogeny of Ornitholestes remains as a topic of debate amongst paleontologists. Even after over a century of the family of Ornitholestes is still a mystery. Hopefully this new paper could potentially bring us one step closer to understanding what Ornitholestes truly is. Ornitholestes was one of the smaller predators that resided in a large fossil formation which is known as the Morrison. First defined in 1877 and spanning across the western United States, many animals dating between the Cambrian to the Devonian stage of the late Jurassic have been found here. From as far south as Arizona and New Mexico to as far north as Montana and North Dakota, many of these dig sites are rich with full-body fossils of many different kinds of animals. The ancient environments preserved in the Morrison are vast. While the environment was mostly arid like a savanna and had been known for its desert-like biomes to the south, there are actually more humid biomes deposited to the north. These northern humid environments are believed to have been formed thanks to an ancient Sundance Sea, an inland seaway that was connected to the Arctic Ocean and cuts its way through western Canada and into the northwest United States. The presence of coal in Montana also supports evidence that these northern regions were surprisingly swampy. Considering where Ornitholestes and its local contemporaries were found, it is not impossible to believe that the small predator was adapted to thrive in both of these biomes, like most Morrison taxa. Due to how arid the formation was, most plant life was riparian, living alongside the shores of river floodplains. Unlike the savannas of today, the Morrison had a different variety of plant life since angiosperms were not the dominant plants during this time. Conifers like the extant sequoia or Acaria in the extinct Brachyphyllum, alongside an extinct species of ginkgo and extinct cycads like Zemites, were the larger dominant plants in the formation, with smaller dominant plants being fern trees, other kinds of ferns, and horsetails. At the Bone Cabin Quarry site where the holotype was first discovered, Ornitholestes lived alongside many different herbivorous dinosaurs, most of which are large, and are common fossil taxa in the Morrison Formation. The herbivores found include the swift Dryosaurus and Camptosaurus, the armored Stegosaurs, and the giant long-necked sauropods Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, Camarasaurus, and a fairly new diplodocid taxa known as Gallimiopus. Since Ornitholestes was smaller and not big enough to take on any of the herbivores listed, this generalist more than likely preyed on the hatchlings of said herbivores, snatching their offspring up at the right opportunity. Considering that the Morrison Formation was rich in biodiversity with herbivorous animals, the same went for competing carnivores that vary in size and shape. While hatchlings of other predators were also likely on the menu, older individuals of the theropods Allosaurus, one of the formation's apex predators, Tanicolagrius, and goniofolidid crocodiliform Eutrateranosuchus would have all served as both competition and predators to Ornitholestes. Outside of the dig site Ornitholestes is from, the overall biodiversity of the Morrison is far more vast, preserving a paleo ecosystem that in many places was under a lot of pressure due to the lack of resources needed to survive. While the main diet of Ornitholestes, putting aside its diet on young individuals, had a diet consisting of the occasional bugs, squamates, mammals, small terrestrial crocodiliforms like Holopus, amphibians like the early frog Eniobadtrachus, and potentially crustaceans and fish. They possibly had a diet on smaller theropod dinosaurs in the region, such as the early troodontids, Hesperornithoides, and Coparion. Most of the pterosaurs that lived during this time, like Herpactinaphus, were too big for Ornitholestes to tackle, and were big enough to serve as occasional competitors. Other competitors and predators to Ornitholestes were mostly theropods like Coelurus, the early Tyrannosaurus Stochisosaurus, the Piatnensky-saurid Marchosaurus, the megalosaurid Torvosaurus, the three-horned Ceratosaurus, and a total of 3 different species of Allosaurus. It would also serve as prey to other goniofolidids like Amphicodylus. In order to keep itself safe from so many predators, it would either hide in a large amount of foliage, or it stayed close to the larger herbivores in the formation, such as the nodosaurs, Mimora pelta, other stegosaurids like Hesperosaurus, and a plenty of other sauropods in the formation. All in all, Ornitholestes was one of the small predators within the Morrison Formation. During this time, it found many different ways to not just hunt, but survive in a world dominated by some of the largest herbivores and carnivores to have ever walked the planet during this period in Earth's history. Ornitholestes has been featured in a fairly diverse amount of movies, documentaries, and video games, with its pop cultural debut being in the 1940 animated Disney film Fantasia and the Rite of Spring segment, with its video game debut was in the 2001 Game Boy Advance game Jurassic Park 3 Park Builder. However, prior to its release, the 10th installment to the Final Fantasy franchise, that being Final Fantasy X, showcases a special enemy within the monster arena that is referred to as Ornitholestes. However, as it is evident with its design, it is clearly not an actual representation of the small dinosaur. In regards to movies and documentaries, its next on-screen appearance would be 50 years later in 1990, where Ornitholestes appeared in the second season of the American animated series Dink the Little Dinosaur. 5 years later, it is speculated to be featured in the animated film The Land Before Time 3, The Time of the Great Giving, as a trio. Afterwards, Ornitholestes would make its first grand appearance in a documentary with the famed 6-part miniseries Walking with Dinosaurs in Episode 2, Time of the Titans, where a single individual is seen eating a newborn Diplodocus, and sometime after, walking by the hatchlings as they hide in the undergrowth. Jumping forward, another Ornitholestes is seen screeching at a now much larger Diplodocus group. It is also worth mentioning that this depiction showcases Ornitholestes with a crest above its nose. During the time of the show's production, it was proposed by Gregory S. Paul that it had a nasal horn on the account of the holotype's nasal bones appearing to bulge upwards. However, this is no longer considered accurate. Later on, the same model would make a reappearance in 2000's Walking with Dinosaurs special, The Ballad of Big Al, stalking a baby Allosaurus, then protecting its nest from a juvenile Big Al. Upon the release of this franchise, Ornitholestes would obtain greater traction in the pop cultural landscape. 10 years later, it would be featured in the second episode of the 4-part documentary miniseries Dinosaur Evolution, titled The Watering Hole. Here, a single Ornitholestes tries to hunt a Rhamphorhynchus. Even though this model doesn't have a nasal horn, an improvement over its Walking with Dinosaurs predecessor, it is still inaccurately shown living in the Lourinhã Formation of Portugal, even though its fossils have only been found in North America. Ornitholestes' latest TV show appearance would be in the 2013 show Primeval New World, in Episode 7, where the characters are being hunted by a pair of these dinosaurs, and once again incorrectly depicted with a nasal horn. As for its latest appearance altogether, it has also appeared in the 2020 mobile game Jurassic World Play. Aside from video games, movies, TV shows, and documentaries, Ornitholestes has also appeared in the 1995 The Lost World novel written by Michael Crichton, where a corpse of the animal is seen washed up on a beach and later destroyed by soldiers. However, once identified later on, a preserved skin sample was taken into research showing that it had the ability to camouflage, although in reality there is no fossil evidence to support this. Overall, Ornitholestes hasn't had a very prominent spotlight over the years since its discovery, but hopefully in the future it will be featured in more paleo media as time goes on. Ornitholestes was a rather intriguing and cunning dinosaur, one that would call the Jurassic equivalent of the African Serengeti its home, and be a part of the now forgotten ecosystem that housed an abundance of awe-inspiring creatures. This dinosaur managed to forge a niche for itself as one of the smaller predators in its environment. However, it would unfortunately go extinct about 153 million years ago. Although the cause of its extinction is currently unknown, there are clues as to why it might have died out. Outside of the holotype, further remains of this dinosaur are rather scarce, with additional material either considered as a completely different dinosaur or having not been fully studied as of yet. Furthermore, it has only been found in the northern part of the formation in what is now Wyoming. This seems to suggest that Ornitholestes was relatively rare and only lived in a certain part of the Morrison Formation. Therefore, it would make them particularly vulnerable to the environmental changes that would be easier for more common dinosaurs to adapt to. And it seems that despite its placement in the Sauropods lineage that managed to survive even the KPG mass extinction, Ornitholestes may not have been adaptable enough to survive the fierce conditions and the competition. However, as the Jurassic Period continued, the Sauropods would persist in the age of the Carnosaurs, and then, as the Cretaceous Period dawned, this lineage diversified into numerous different groups of their own. One of these groups would go on to emerge as the most fearsome and largest predators to ever live on land, those being, of course, the Tyrannosaurs. Meanwhile, the close relatives of Ornitholestes would bring about descendants that would be equally, if not more, successful, and would consist of some of the smartest, fastest, and most bizarre animals to have ever lived. These would be the Ornithomimosaurs and the Maniraptorans. As from this lineage, their success would lead to a different group of dinosaurs known as birds. They would manage to spread to every corner of the globe and survive in even the most inhospitable places on the planet. And even though the non-avian dinosaurs would sadly perish at the very end of the Cretaceous, birds would continue their legacy, showing us how resilient life on our planet truly is. And with that remarkable discovery of the first theropod to be uncovered in the 1900s, at the turn of the 20th century, it along with numerous other discoveries would kick off a new wave of paleontology, known as the Dinosaur Renaissance. Gone was the times of dinosaurs being depicted as lumbering, cold-blooded animals, but rather a new era where these magnificent beasts are seen as highly active and warm-blooded. And even though this animal went extinct millions of years ago, its legacy is not only that of one of the earliest members of Sauropods as a whole, but that of a dinosaur that gave paleontologists a brand new perspective on how these magnificent creatures would have behaved and what they could have looked like in life. And all of this can be traced back to the discovery of Ornitholestes, Osborn's robber bird. Thank you all for watching our latest episode of Epoch Now, all about the incredible Ornitholestes. We're so happy to finally have a video out after quite a long absence, and we hope you've enjoyed it as well. Today's video was directed and narrated by myself, LegitEliminator. It was written by CrimsonAcro, SpinoDragon145, RangoGamer, The Primal Earth, and myself. It was edited by Mike MC9797, The Primal Earth, SpinoDragon145, RangoGamer, CrimsonAcro, and myself. And the graphic designer for this video was the Dinosaur Hunter, who did the thumbnail and animation. And lastly, the research team for this video was SpinoDragon145, CrimsonAcro, RangoGamer, and myself. And with that, thank you all for watching, and we will see you all in the next video.